You don't need a big backyard. 15 genius hacks that transform tiny gardens into productive paradises. Hey there, fellow green souls. Welcome back to Earthly Delights, where even the tiniest garden can spark the biggest joy. If you're someone who finds peace in the rustle of leaves, who sneaks out to check on a sprouting seed like it's a newborn, or who dreams of growing food even in the corner of an apartment balcony, this space was made for you. I know many of you watching don't have sprawling backyards or hours of free time. Maybe you're balancing a busy life, living in a small urban space, or just starting your first ever herb garden in a sunny kitchen window. And yet, something inside you longs to grow, to reconnect with the earth, to harvest something real. In today's video, I'll walk you through 15 space-saving, soul-nourishing gardening hacks that I've tested, failed at, and finally mastered. These tricks will transform how you see your space and what it can grow. If that sounds like your kind of journey, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Let's grow a little magic together. 1. Growing up, not out. Vertical gardening for the space-starved gardener. Have you ever looked at your garden space and thought, that's it? That's all I have to work with? I've been there too. Years ago, I stood on the tiny balcony of my apartment, holding a seed packet in one hand and doubt in the other. But then, something shifted. I stopped thinking outward and started thinking upward. See, when you don't have room to spread out, it's time to rise. And vertical gardening isn't just a trend, it's a quiet revolution for people like us. People who love the earth but live in small apartments, shared homes, or cozy backyards carved out between fences. Climbing plants like pole beans, peas, and cucumbers? They're nature's acrobats, just waiting for a string or trellis to dance on. But it doesn't stop there. Herbs, leafy greens, strawberries, even compact tomatoes, can all thrive in vertical wall planters or hanging baskets. It's not about forcing them into a shape they weren't meant for. It's about giving them a chance to reach their potential, just like we're doing. One of my favorite discoveries was using an old wooden ladder, propped against the wall and repurposed as a vertical herb shelf. Each step held a pot, thyme on top, mint trailing below, basil reaching toward the sun in the middle. Suddenly, that dull wall became alive, useful, beautiful. And here's the quiet truth. Vertical gardening doesn't just save space. It makes your garden feel bigger. It draws your eye upward. It fills the air with green. It creates dimension, structure, and wonder, even if your entire setup fits between a door and a window. So the next time you feel boxed in by your space, don't shrink your dream, just let your garden grow up. Ready to discover what else your small garden can do? Let's move on to the next tip that saved me hours of watering, and gave my plants exactly what they were begging for. Stay with me. 2. The secret life of containers. How grow bags and portable pots quietly transform your garden. Not every garden begins in the ground. Some of the best ones begin on wheels, shelves, and in soft fabric bags that breathe. Back when I lived in a rental with a sun-soaked driveway and not a patch of soil in sight, I almost gave up on growing anything real. But then I discovered grow bags, and let me tell you, that moment changed everything. Suddenly, the idea that you needed a yard to grow food became a myth I was happy to break. Grow bags are quiet game changers. They're portable, breathable, and forgiving. You don't need a shovel or a permanent space. You just fill them, plant, and watch the magic happen. I started with potatoes in a 10-gallon bag and soon had leafy greens, peppers, even dwarf tomatoes, all thriving in containers I could move around like furniture. What I love most is their flexibility. When the sun shifts, I shift them. When rain is too much, I bring them in. They follow my rhythm, not the other way around. And if you've ever worried about overwatering or root rot, grow bags practically solve it for you. Their fabric allows excess water to drain and air to flow, which means your roots stay strong and healthy. There's something else, too, something subtler. These containers, humble as they look, carry a powerful energy. They're symbols of possibility. They remind us that even without perfect conditions, life finds a way, especially when we give it a soft place to root. So if you've got a balcony, a fire escape, a back step, or even a sunny corner of your living room, trust me, your garden can grow there. You just need the right container. and the belief that it's possible. Coming up next, let's talk about watering, the part we all tend to underestimate until it's too late. But don't worry, I've got a trick that does the work for you while you sleep. 3. Irrigation that works while you rest. The lazy gardener's secret to deep roots and thriving plants. Let's be honest, watering seems simple, until it isn't. At first, you're excited, you check your plants every morning, cup in hand, whispering encouragement, but then life happens. You skip a day, maybe two, the sun blazes, leaves wilt, and suddenly, your little green sanctuary feels more like a guilt trip than a joy. That's exactly where I was, until I discovered the quiet brilliance of automatic watering systems. Drip irrigation, soaker hoses, even gravity-fed bottles with a hole poked in the lid, they changed everything. You see, the magic isn't just in saving time. It's in how the water flows, slowly, deeply, right at the roots. No soggy leaves, no wasteful sprinkling, just deep hydration, exactly where your plants crave it. It's the difference between a plant that survives and one that thrives. In my small garden, I use a simple timer system that runs at dawn. While I'm still dreaming, my lettuce is sipping. While I'm brewing coffee, my peppers are being fed. And guess what? I haven't lost a plant to thirst in over 3 years. But here's something I learned the hard way. Watering less doesn't mean neglecting. It means understanding. It means respecting your garden's rhythm, because consistent, gentle watering creates calm, resilient plants. And calm, resilient plants create a calm, resilient gardener. So, whether you invest in a solar-powered drip kit, repurpose wine bottles as water stakes, or just lay a humble soaker hose, remember this. It's not lazy to automate. It's wise, it's sustainable, and it's how you keep growing without burning out. Now that we've quenched our plants' thirst, let's turn our attention to what lies beneath, the soil itself. Because what happens underground determines everything that blooms above. Stay close. 4. Soil that breathes life. Mulch, wool, and the quiet revolution beneath your feet. Let me tell you a secret, one that took me years to truly understand. The soul of your garden is your soil. Not the plants, not the pots, not even the sunlight, but the rich, living matter beneath it all. And if you treat your soil like gold, it'll pay you back 100-fold. But how do you protect something that lives under the surface? That's where mulch, and a few unexpected tricks, come in. I used to think mulch was just something fancy gardeners used to make their beds look tidy. But once I started layering straw, leaves, and even shredded paper over my raised beds and containers, something incredible happened. The moisture stayed, the weeds disappeared, the earthworms showed up, and my plants? They just exhaled. And then I discovered something even more amazing, wool pellets. Yes, natural sheep wool, crumbled into tiny bits, tucked into the soil like a cozy blanket. It holds water, feeds nitrogen, and slowly breaks down into pure nutrition. It's like giving your plants a slow-release hug. This matters more than ever in small gardens where every drop of water and every handful of soil counts. Whether you're growing in fabric bags, balcony pots, or corner beds, mulching is not optional. It's the quiet protector of everything you grow. It keeps roots cool in the heat, warm in the cold, and safe during every wild twist the weather throws your way. I often say that mulch is like the silence between musical notes, subtle, but essential. Without it, everything else struggles to stay in tune. So before we move forward, pause and look down. Are your plants standing on dry, cracked soil, or are they rooted in something alive? Something soft, something ready? Up next, we're going to talk about something even more powerful than protection. We're going to talk about plant friendships, yes, really, because the right companions don't just grow next to each other, they help each other thrive. Let's dig into that. 5. Grow smart with companions and interplanting. Building a garden that feels like community. Every plant has a story, but what makes that story richer is who's growing beside it. I remember the first time I planted basil next to my tomatoes. I didn't expect much, just 2 crops in the same bed. But as the weeks passed, I noticed something different. The tomatoes were healthier. The basil was bushier. Fewer pests showed up. It was like they were looking out for each other. That's the magic of companion planting. This isn't just about saving space. It's about building relationships in your garden, pairing plants that support one another. Some deter pests, others attract pollinators, some provide shade or nutrients. But all of them, when paired thoughtfully, turn your patch of soil into a thriving, interwoven community. Think of it like neighbors who share resources. Beets, lettuce, and onions grow well together, each minding their own space. Tomatoes love being around basil and chives. Corn, beans, and squash? That's the legendary three sisters. One stands tall, one climbs, and one spreads low to shade the ground. But don't get too caught up in the rules. Some pairings work in one garden and flop in another. And that's okay. Gardening, like friendship, requires a little experimentation, a little forgiveness, and a lot of observation. And then there's interplanting, a sister strategy that focuses less on who likes who, and more on how they grow together. Pairing fast growers like radishes or lettuce alongside slower crops like peppers or tomatoes. Let the quick ones finish first, giving space for the others to shine. In my own garden, I often tuck greens between root crops, or plant short herbs under taller vines. It's like puzzle pieces fitting together, each plant finding its place. No waste, no crowding, just harmony. So when you're planning your next garden box, don't just think rows, think relationships, think rhythms, think about how your plants can help each other rise. Because in the end, gardens aren't just ecosystems of plants, they're ecosystems of support. Now that you've met the garden's best collaborators, it's time to bring structure to your layout, literally. What if I told you a simple grid could unlock your garden's full potential? Let me show you how next. 6. Square foot magic. How one simple grid can multiply your harvests. Let me ask you something. Have you ever stared at your garden bed? Seeds in hand, unsure where to start, you measure by instinct, scatter with hope, and then, weeks later, things look crowded in one corner, empty in another. I've been there too, but then I found a method so simple, it felt almost too good to be true. It's called square foot gardening, and it's a game changer, especially for small spaces. Imagine taking your raised bed or even a large container and dividing it into tidy 1 by 1 foot squares. Each square becomes its own little world, a unit of space you can plan, optimize, and harvest from with precision. No guessing, no mess, just clarity. I remember using twine and binder clips to mark my first grid. As I tied the last line across the bed, it was like a light turned on in my brain. Suddenly, I could see the possibilities. 1 tomato plant here, 4 lettuces there, 9 spinach plants in that square. And somehow, it all made sense. It's more than visual, it's intentional. This method helps you avoid overcrowding, manage succession planting, and reduce waste. And because your plants are placed close enough to shade the soil, it naturally suppresses weeds and retains moisture, saving you work in the long run. And here's the best part. You don't need anything fancy. You can make your grid with string, wooden dowels, even sticks from your yard. The point isn't perfection, it's perspective. Square foot gardening is like turning chaos into choreography. It gives every plant a place, every seed a purpose. And when space is tight, clarity is power. So if your garden has ever felt like a jumbled notebook of crossed out plans, try the grid. It doesn't just organize your soil, it organizes your thinking. Now that we've set the stage for a more efficient garden, it's time to meet the stars of your show, crops that give and keep giving. Over and over again, ready to discover the leafy. 7. Cut and come again crops for endless greens. Harvest once, eat many times. Now here's a little gardening secret that feels like cheating, in the best possible way. What if I told you there are crops you can harvest again and again, without having to dig, replant, or start fresh? Just a gentle snip, and within days, they're back, greener, fuller, ready to nourish you once more. That's the magic of cut and come again crops. In my earliest gardening days, I thought harvest meant pulling a plant up by its roots. A one-time deal. Lettuce? Gone. Spinach? Done. But then I learned the gentle art of harvesting only the outer leaves, leaving the heart of the plant intact. And suddenly, I wasn't just growing food, I was growing renewal. Lettuce, kale, arugula, chard. They're like nature's generosity made visible. With every trim, you're not depleting the plant. You're inviting it to give more. It's an elegant relationship. The plant wants to keep going. And you let it. I remember one small bed of mixed greens I planted in early spring. Just 3 square feet. And yet, for nearly 2 months, that little patch fed my family salad after salad. Crisp, fresh, living food, from the same humble plants. And here's a bonus tip. Some root crops give double the value. Beet greens and radish tops are not only edible, they're delicious. So you're not just growing one crop. You're growing two. This is the kind of gardening that fits perfectly into small spaces. It's efficient, satisfying, and deeply aligned with how nature truly works, through cycles, not ends. So before you tug that lettuce out of the soil, pause, look closer. If the center's still strong, you've got more harvests waiting. Now that we've planted the idea of getting more from what you've already sown, let's take it one step further. What if you could always have something growing, no matter the month or weather? Let's talk about a rhythm that keeps your garden in constant motion. Stay with me. 8. Garden timing. So smart. Not hard. The secret of succession planting for a year-round harvest. If you've ever felt the heartbreak of an empty garden bed, bare soil staring back at you while your neighbor's plot overflows, then you already understand why timing is everything. But here's the good news. You don't need a giant space to have a garden that never stops giving. You just need rhythm, and that's where succession planting becomes your best ally. Succession planting is like the heartbeat of a productive garden. Instead of planting everything at once and watching it all come and go, you stagger your sowing. A little now, a little later. That way, when one crop finishes, another steps up. No downtime, no wasted space, just a quiet, rolling harvest that keeps going long after others have packed up their gloves. I remember the first season one tried this. I sowed lettuce every 3 weeks in between my taller crops. By the time one batch was ready to bolt, the next was already coming in, fresh, crisp, and ready for harvest. It was like having waves of abundance moving through my tiny raised bed. Fast maturing crops are perfect for this. Think radishes, baby greens, bush beans. They grow quick and finish fast, giving you room to plant again. And the best part? It keeps your garden alive. There's always something growing, always something to look forward to. You don't need a fancy planner either. I use sticky notes on the fridge, one for each crop, color-coded by planting date. Every time I sow a new round, I move the note forward on the calendar. It's not perfect, but it keeps me in sync with my soil. This rhythm, this gentle dance between sowing and re-sowing, is what turns a small garden into a steady source of nourishment. And now that you've learned to stretch time in your favor, let's explore how to stretch space. Because even the tiniest corners of your garden can become treasure chests of food, if you know how to use them right. Let me show you next. 9. Reclaim corners and unlikely spaces. Turning forgotten spots into growing gold. Let me ask you something. Have you ever walked through your garden or patio and thought, I wish I had just a little more space? What if I told you that space is already there, you're just not seeing it yet? Tiny corners, narrow strips along a wall, the awkward edge of a raised bed, the forgotten space beside a stair rail or even the windowsill you always overlook. These aren't empty, they're opportunities waiting to grow. I learned this the hard way, after running out of room and feeling frustrated. But then I started looking at my space differently. That old teapot? It held mint. A cracked ceramic bowl? Perfect for trailing time. The steps to my back door? Suddenly covered in parsley and spinach in mismatched containers. None of it looked perfect, but every inch was alive. The trick is choosing crops that cooperate, plants that don't demand the spotlight. Fast growers, compact herbs, shallow-rooted greens, marigolds to deter pests, radishes tucked under taller plants, strawberries spilling out of hanging shoe organizers by the fence. When you start growing like this, something changes in you. You begin to see possibility everywhere. Every nook becomes a canvas. Every gap becomes a gift. One of my favorite memories is when my daughter harvested a whole bunch of carrots from what she called the tiny carrot jungle, a slim little spot between the fence and the compost bin. It wasn't pretty, but it was magic. So, before you say, I have no more room, take a second look. Is there a sunny ledge? A patch of dirt between pavers? An old bucket you could fill? Because when you learn to grow in the cracks, just like weeds do, you realize the garden isn't limited to where you plan to plant. It's where life finds a way. And speaking of life, let's talk about how to feed your soil between plantings. Even in small beds, the next secret might surprise you. It's borrowed from farmers, but works beautifully on balconies. Let's go there now. 10. The magic of cover crops, even in tiny beds. Feed the soil, not just the plants. If you've ever harvested your last tomato and looked at your empty garden bed wondering, now what? You're not alone. Most of us treat the time between plantings as a pause, a break, a waiting room. But what if I told you that even when you're not growing vegetables, your garden could still be working, still improving, still quietly preparing for what comes next? Enter the world of cover crops, nature's way of restoring, refreshing, and recharging your soil. Now, I know what you might be thinking. Aren't cover crops just for farmers with big fields? That's what I thought too, until I tried planting a handful of buckwheat in my raised bed after pulling out the summer beans. Within 2 weeks, it was lush and green, buzzing with bees, shading the soil, and adding organic matter with every leaf. Cover crops like clover, oats, or buckwheat are like planting a green blanket over your soil. They prevent erosion. They hold moisture. Some even fix nitrogen from the air into the soil, giving your next crops a nutrient boost. And yes, they work wonderfully in small spaces. I now keep a little packet of clover seeds in my garden drawer. Whenever a container finishes its season, I toss a few in, water lightly, and let nature do her thing. When the cover crop flowers, I cut it back and let it compost right in place. No hauling, no waste, just richer, healthier earth. The beauty of cover crops is that they take the pressure off. You don't have to grow food every single day to make progress. Sometimes, just growing green is enough. Enough to keep your garden alive. Enough to honor the soil. Enough to prepare for what's next. And what's next is something we all have in our kitchens. Yet many people still throw away. Want to learn how your everyday scraps can become the richest treasure in your 11. Composting, the small space way. Turning kitchen scraps into garden gold. Let's take a walk to the kitchen for a moment. Picture this. You're chopping vegetables, peeling carrots, trimming spinach. You toss the scraps in the trash or maybe the disposal. Gone, forgotten. But what if those scraps weren't waste, but wealth? Composting, even in the smallest home, is one of the most powerful things you can do for your garden. And no, you don't need a backyard, a giant pile, or a complicated system. All you need is intention and a small, contained space to let nature do her work. I started small, a countertop bin, a few vegetable peels, coffee grounds, crushed eggshells. At first, it didn't seem like much. But weeks later, I opened that bin to find something extraordinary, dark, crumbly, nutrient-rich compost, what gardeners call black gold. That gold didn't come from a bag. It came from my own table. And it made my garden sing. You can use a worm bin under your sink, or a bokashi bin that fits in a kitchen corner. Some people even keep compost jars in their freezer to control smells before transferring them to a bigger container outside. It's not glamorous, but oh, is it transformational? I use that compost for everything, blending it into container soil, adding it around hungry herbs, even steeping it in water to make a compost tea that feeds tired plants with a burst of energy. And here's the deeper truth. Composting connects you to your food, to the earth, to the cycle of life. What you once threw away now becomes the source of your next meal. That is healing work, even in a one-bedroom apartment. So next time you reach for the trash, pause, ask yourself, could this become something more? Because in gardening, nothing truly goes to waste. Everything returns. Everything has value. And speaking of value, what if you could grow more food with less effort? What if certain plants gave you bigger rewards from the smallest spaces? That's what we're diving into next, and you're going to want to take notes. Let's go. 12. Plant what pays you back. High-yield crops for small space success. If you're gardening in a tiny space, here's something you already know. Every inch matters. So the question becomes, how do you choose what to plant when your space is limited and your time is precious? The answer lies in planting what I call value crops. The kinds of plants that give you more for your effort. More food, more harvests, more joy. These are the crops that pay you back. Let me take you back to one summer when I had only a single raised bed and a few grow bags. I could have planted anything. But instead of scattering random seeds, I focused on high-yield heroes, like cherry tomatoes, zucchini, cut and come again greens, and pole beans. What I got in return was weeks, sometimes months, of harvest from just a few square feet. Zucchini, in particular, blew my mind. I trained it vertically, tying it gently to a stake and pruning the lower leaves. It grew upward like a green skyscraper, giving me fruit after fruit without hogging space. And cherry tomatoes? Don't even get me started. A single plant filled our salads, pastas, and snack bowls for nearly the entire season. When space is tight, every choice becomes a strategy. Grow what your family actually eats. Grow what thrives in your zone. Grow what gives back, over and over again. And don't forget about underappreciated gems like bush beans, compact cucumbers, or even fast-growing radishes. These plants don't ask for much, but they give in abundance. They're the kind of crops that turn a small balcony garden into a real source of nourishment. So, if you've ever felt limited by your growing space, remember, it's not about how much space you have. It's about how smart you use it. Up next, we'll zoom in even closer and talk about compact varieties, those specially bred to thrive in containers and tight corners. Trust me, these little plants pack a mighty punch. Let's take a look. 13. Small but mighty, compact crops that do more with less. The unsung heroes of container gardening. Sometimes, the biggest harvests don't come from big plants. When I first started gardening in tight spaces, I assumed I had to give up on growing certain vegetables, tomatoes, squash, even cucumbers, because I thought they needed room to sprawl. But then I discovered something wonderful: compact varieties. Specially bred plants that offer full-size flavor, full-sized yields, in miniature, space-saving form. These are the quiet champions of container gardening. The ones that prove small doesn't mean less, it often means smarter. One summer, I planted a bush Goliath tomato in a 5-gallon bucket by my front door. I wasn't expecting much, but by July, I had a steady stream of juicy, red fruit, all from a plant no taller than my knee. Right next to it, a mini Mulch cucumber winding up a bamboo stake, offering crisp little cukes perfect for snacking. And then there were the lunchbox peppers. Oh, those beautiful, bite-sized bursts of color. They took up barely any space, but they were the first thing my kids ran to harvest after school. Compact varieties are perfect for people like us, urban growers, balcony dreamers, porch gardeners. They thrive in raised beds, hanging baskets, window boxes, and even recycled containers. Because they're smaller, they also tend to resist disease better, get more airflow, and are easier to manage. But here's what I really love: they remove the fear. You don't need to tame a jungle of vines. You just nurture something petite, purposeful, and wildly productive. So if you're working with just a few feet of space, don't see that as a limitation. See it as a reason to explore the compact universe, where every leaf, every blossom, every bite-sized fruit feels like a quiet celebration. Next, let's take that philosophy a step further. What if I told you the corners, cracks, and leftover patches of your space are not afterthoughts, but hidden gems? It's time to reclaim those forgotten zones and grow where you least expect it. Let's explore that in the next part. 14. Plant on purpose. Perennials that pay rent year after year. Grow once, harvest forever. There's something incredibly comforting about planting something once, and knowing it will come back to greet you, season after season. That's the quiet promise of edible perennials. While most vegetables ask for your attention every year, seed, sow, water, repeat, perennials whisper a different kind of invitation. Let me settle in. Let me stay. When I first planted a small cluster of chives in a grow bag by my kitchen door, I didn't think much of it. But the next year, there they were, stronger, thicker, even more fragrant than before. I split them into new pots, gave some to friends, and still had more than enough for every baked potato and omelet. That's the gift of perennials. They don't just feed your body, They feed your sense of stability. Strawberries, blueberries, sorrel, lemon balm, thyme. They're all quiet growers that reward patience with abundance. Some are compact and perfect for containers. Others thrive along the edges of raised beds. And all of them add beauty and purpose to a garden that's built for the long haul. Of course, not all perennials are well behaved. Mint, for example, loves to take over if you let it. But that's where containers come in. They give you the freedom to enjoy without the chaos. And here's a little known trick. Perennial herbs like oregano, sage, and rosemary don't just flavor your food, they invite pollinators, deter pests, and build a richer ecosystem in your garden. They become part of the fabric of your growing space. So if you're tired of starting from scratch every spring, consider letting a few of these plants put down roots for good. Give them a place in your garden, and they'll return the favor. Year after year. And now, we're almost at the end of our journey. But there's one final trick I want to share with you. It's simple, humble, and a bit unusual, but it completely changed the way I start seeds in tough conditions. Let's wrap up with something quietly powerful. Come along. 15. The board method, a gentle trick for better germination. How a piece of wood helped my seeds finally sprout. Some of the most powerful gardening lessons don't come from expensive tools or high-tech gadgets. They come from simple observations, quiet experiments, and in this case, a humble piece of wood. Let me take you back to the year I nearly gave up on growing carrots. I followed every instruction, planted the seeds carefully, watered them gently, but every time, patchy germination, a few brave sprouts, surrounded by bare soil. I thought it was me, or the seeds, or the weather. But then, I came across something called the board method, a trick so simple. I almost dismissed it. After sowing your seeds, you just place a flat board, piece of burlap, or cardboard gently over the soil. That's it. Leave it there for a few days. What does it do? It keeps the soil cool. It holds in moisture. It protects fragile seeds from harsh sun, wind, or sudden downpours. I tried it, and what happened next was nothing short of a miracle. Even consistent sprouting. A carpet of green where I used to see nothing. It was like giving my seeds a little quiet room to rest and wake up when they were ready. Now, every time I plant shallow seeds, carrots, lettuce, spinach, I reach for my trusty board. Sometimes it's a scrap of wood from an old shelf. Sometimes it's a folded towel. It doesn't have to be fancy. It just has to stay in place and hold space for something to begin. And when those tiny seedlings poke their heads above the soil, I lift the board like lifting a curtain, and let the garden's next act begin. It's a small gesture, but one that reminds me, sometimes, growth just needs a little shelter, a pause, a softer start. Now that we've explored the soil, the seeds, the systems, and the small miracles, there's only one thing left to say. And it might be the most important part of all. Let's close this. Your garden, your way. Grow where you are. A final note from one grower to another. And so here we are, at the end of this little journey through tiny spaces. Clever tricks, and quiet transformations. If you've made it this far, then I know something about you. You're not just interested in gardening. You feel it, deep down, whether you have a single pot on a balcony or a handful of grow bags on a sunny windowsill. You're not just growing plants, you're growing possibility. And I want to tell you something that no tutorial, no seed packet, no expert voice can truly explain. Your garden does not have to look like anyone else's. It doesn't need raised beds with perfect symmetry. It doesn't need expensive tools or designer soil. It just needs your care, your attention, your willingness to learn, adapt, and try again. It's easy to scroll through perfect gardens online and feel like yours isn't enough. But the truth? Those messy corners, those trial and error plantings, those wilted leaves you learned from, they're part of the beauty. Because the most successful gardens aren't always the ones that produce the most food. They're the ones that nourish the soul of the person growing them. So if you've planted a single seed today, or even just an idea, you're already doing something extraordinary. And if this video inspired you, taught you something new, or simply made you feel seen, I invite you to join our little community here at Earthly Delights. Hit that subscribe button, give this video a like, and let me know in the comments, What small space are you growing in? Because wherever you are, whatever you're working with, you're not alone. We're all growing together. Until next time, may your roots grow deep, your leaves reach high, and your harvest, both in the garden and in life, be more abundant than you ever imagined.